Hey everyone, how's it going? My name is Scrassy and today we're going to be looking at variables. So I'm going to try and get straight into this. I know I want to try and make it as quick as possible, but I also want to dive as deep as I can into it because I know for me it took me a while to actually wrap my head around all of it, at least at the very start. So variables, we're going to be answering these three main questions, and that is, what is a variable, why do we use them, and how can we use them to our advantage to make games. So variables are probably the most, if not important, part of programming or anything that requires computers, because we need somewhere to store our data. That's basically what a variable is. So if we, let's say, try to use your computer without any storage, you would have a little bit of a hard time trying to use your computer because you won't be able to use it. The reason why is you need to store your data somewhere so you can actually use it. And basically a variable, all it is just a container that's storing a piece of data. And that's what we call that data. That's a number of 5. We go, hey, see that box over there? See that container? We're going to call that number, and we're going to put this piece of data inside that box. We're going to put the lid on it, and boom. Now that box is called number, and that box holds the number 5. Okay, that's basically what it is. We're just saying, hey, this value, we're putting it inside this box. We're going to call that box something, right? And we can then have so many different variables. You can have as many variables as you want, but this is what a variable is. And let's say for here, we've got 3 variables, and we want variable 3 to equal variable 1. Okay, we would simply say, hey, let's get this piece of data that's in variable 1 and move it over to variable 3. And now variable 3 also equals variable 1. We haven't actually taken the data from variable 1, we've just copied it over to variable 3. Now variable 3 and variable 1 equal the same value. Now let's look at the very first variable. Very first variable on our list is the float. The float is basically a fancy way of saying, hey, we've got a number that has a point decimal. So any number that's 1.0 to the highest number you can think of, but it has 1.0, 1.5, 1.7, 2.3. There's no whole numbers with the floats. If you have 1, it's 1.0. Okay. When would you use these, or why would you use these? So we would use these with things like randomness, or when you need very precision based stuff. So when you want to be very precise about certain things, you would want to use floats because they have decimal points. You could also use these for things like percentages. So using for progress bars or health bars that have a progress bar with a percentage from 100% down to 0%. So that's when you would use things like floats. I usually use them for things like that, so randomness, all that type of stuff. An integer is basically just a float or an int that it's just a whole number. So there's no point decimal place. It's just 1, 2, 3. You can't have 1.5 or 2.5. Now you might say, hey, when would I use either of these two? Why would I use either of these two? So why would you use the float over an int, or why would I use an int over the float? All right. If anything, you'd only use floats because you can be more precise with them, and in ints you can't have any point decimals. The reason why I say is because you would use an int in circumstances where you only want whole numbers to exist. So let's say, for example, the game The Finals has a health of 150. At least last time I remember, when you take damage, your health only goes down by whole numbers. It doesn't go down by a percentage, it goes down by a whole number. So if you get shot, your health goes from 150 down to 120. That's when you'd use int. You'd also use int for things like ammo. So character's ammo. So if you have a gun, let's say you have a pistol, and it has 8 bullets, you only want to make sure you have 8 bullets. And when you shoot, you only want to have 7. You don't want to have 7.5 because that doesn't make sense. Also things like if you have coins in a MMO game or anything like that, you have coins, you would probably want, or maybe experience, you would only want it to be a whole number. We look at a Boolean. A Boolean is simply just a true or false statement. That's all it is. And if we actually pull out of here, type if. Don't type branch, type if. click enter. And what that does is that goes and that branch is basically dividing it. It's like a branch. That's why it's called a branch. It divides it up and goes, hey, we're going to get this Boolean variable. Then we're going to go and say, hey, is it true or is it false? That's all it is. A Boolean variable is a true or false statement. So if I said, hey, am I wearing a watch? And I am wearing a watch, then this Boolean variable would be true. But if I'm not wearing a watch, then it would be false. Let's say if I am wearing a watch, and I've got this plugged into this pin. These are called pins. Okay, this is an input pin. So it's on the left. Anything on the left is an input. On the right is an output. So I'll plug my input, my condition. If you see, if I get rid of it, it's actually just based on if I check it or not. So if I click it like that and it's marked, it's always going to be true. But if I uncheck it, it's always going to be false. But if I plug this in, it's going to be dynamic and it's going to be based off whatever this variable is. So if I am wearing a watch, it's going to come out true. If I'm not, it's going to come out false. Now, when would you use these? You'd use these for things like checks, okay? For checking if your character is running, or checking if you have any ammo left in your gun, or checking to make sure if the player, when they're trying to buy an item from the item shop, has enough coins, stuff like that. So that's when you'd usually use Boolean variables. The name variable is simply just a piece of text that is meant for names. So a name variable, you would hold a name of someone or the name of a gun or something like that. So if I had a weapon class and I had an AK-47, I would then have a name variable and I'd call it AK-47. You would do that because the name variable is used to go and basically either find or identify certain actors by what they are. So if you, let's say, had a username, an in-game username, you would then, and you shot someone, you see in Call of Duty, when you go and you kill someone, it says your name, and then it has the gun you used, and then it has the person's name that you killed on the kill feed. What that's doing is that's going, hey, you've killed this guy, and when you kill the guy, it gets their name variable, and it goes and displays it on the kill feed. That's why you would use a name. A string variable, you usually don't want to use this too much because this is more meant for prototyping. So it's just a generic text variable, and that's basically it. You wouldn't use it for anything specific, mostly just prototyping maybe, but I never use it. A text variable, it's the same as a name, however, you'd use it for things like UI. So you wouldn't use it for identifying anyone by name, you'd use it for going and displaying text to a character. So if you had a gun and it had a description or it had some stats, you'd then use it for that. You'd use it for UI, like an ammo counter, stuff like that. Anything like that. Anything that requires showing text to the actual player themselves. A vector is just a location in the game world. That's what all these are. Vector is basically made out of 3 floats. That's all it is, right? It's made out of X, Y, and Z coordinates or axes, okay? And they're all floats. So that's for using things like the location of an object in the world, let's say a cube. The rotation or the rotator variable is the same thing as a vector. It's just basically a reskin and it allows you to work with rotating a character a little bit easier. So you do want to make sure that you use these appropriately when needed. You would want to use location for moving the location, rotating for rotating the character or the object, whatever it is. And these are made up of the same thing, just 3 float variables, and it's X, Y, and Z. However, the X is called roll, Y is called pitch, and Z is called yaw. You can imagine it's called roll, pitch, yaw, X, Y, Z. So that's why that's the rotator variable. The transform is simply just a vector, a rotator, and a scale. That's all it is. So it just holds those 3. So instead of holding 3 floats, it holds 3 vector variables. Basically, a vector is just the 3 floats. So it's basically holding a vector, a rotator, and a scale. Usually you don't use transforms too much unless you want to go and do things like procedural animations and anything that requires maybe wanting to store a vector and a rotator in it. Usually you don't want to change the scale. But that's basically it for those. If we actually go over to here, these are the set versions. So if we go here we can put this back to 0. And the set version is basically just saying, hey, we want our float, or we want our int, or whatever variable it is, to be equal to a new value. And this input pin is going to be the value we want it to equal to. Let's say we had a value out of here. We had another float variable called float2, and we said, hey, that float2 is equal to 5. Then now what we're saying is that this will be set to the value of 5 instead of the value of 0. Same thing with this. All this stuff here, you can just go and set it with the input pin, and then you can get the output. You can get whatever the variable, the new value is. Things like this here with vector, rotator, and transform, you can see here X, Y, and Z. X, Y, and Z, or roll, pitch, yaw, and transform. Now, if we actually pull these aside a little bit, you can see here that if we actually go to this pin here, okay, and you can tell that it's just a vector pin because you can see it's yellow. Same thing it is. It's like a purplish blue color, and this is orange, okay? This is actually called a pin. This is an input pin because it's coming in from the left, you're putting it in, and this is an output pin. It's what the result of whatever you've done here is. So that's the output. You're getting the new value, and you're gonna get whatever that new value is. You can right click on that, and you can split struct pin, okay? You're splitting the pin, and it's called a struct pin because a struct is simply just a variable that holds a bunch of different variables. So let's say I had a struct called my struct, and then I had a float variable, an integer variable, and a Boolean variable. That is just one variable, but it's holding 3 different variables inside of it. It's the same thing with this. This is a vector variable, however, it's holding 3 different float variables inside of it. That's why it's called split struct pin. So you're going to split that, and look at that. So now you can see the pin change from yellow to green because now they're taking a float. So now if let's say I wanted to just adjust the Z axes, I just wanted to adjust the cube to go up and down, and that's it. Let's say it's a weird platform that goes up and down, you can ride it. You just want to go and plug in a value into Z, and now that's, even though you get a new vector variable or new vector output, the vector Y and Z, or vector Y and X, are going to be 0 still, but the Z will be changed. So let's say it's 50, we'll change it to 50. You can then still do the same thing in split struct pin, and you get the variables here. You can do this also with just getting. If you get it, you can go split struct pin, and you can get just the X or the Y or the Z value. So that's, you'd usually use these for things like when you only want to, if you're making, I made a procedural weapon, what is it, recoil or weapon sway. With a procedural recoil, I only want my character's arms to move back. I don't want them to move left or right or up and down. That's what the rotating is for. So I only made that the vector Y was modified. None of these were. I could then recombine these, and then I could then plug this into my character's modification bones and the animation blueprint. And that would basically allow me to just move it back and forward. So that's when you'd use things like that. Same thing with the rotator. You can see if I split it, you can see it's got X roll, Y pitch, and your Z. And then same thing with the transform. However, if I split it, you can see because the transform is made up of a location, rotation, and scale, it actually just splits into these 3. I can then split them again like that. You can see now we have a bunch of float variables, and this can become very complicated or advanced real quick. So make sure that usually for things like this, if you ever are changing like the X or the location or the rotation, you leave it like that. Don't worry about the scale. Usually, unless you're making a very unique game, you don't want to change the scale. But if you need to, then you know what to do. But let's say you only want to change the transform and you want to change the rotation, but you just want to change all of it, you could do it like this. Same thing with here, you can split the end of it. So that's basically all it is, guys. So I'm pretty sure I got everything through. I know this video went for about 15 minutes, so I'll head off. But no, thanks for coming in, and Put any comments down below if you think that I've missed anything out or you wish that I explained something a little bit better. Awesome. Well, thanks for that, guys, and I'll see you in the next one.